Right, hello there ladies and gents, welcome to another repair video. Today we're going to be working on this Xbox One X which has been sent in. This particular console has been sent in because it has a flickering display. So it was originally sent in for a HDMI port. However, upon further inspection it turns out that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the port, according to what I can see with the eyes. It does look a little bit bent, like it's been knocked in the past, but the complaint is that it flickers on and off, and the customer said that he thought it was a HDMI port, but obviously that's a bit of a misdiagnosis and it's actually likely going to be the retimer. So let's do what we always do, let's turn it on, let's see what's happening, and then we'll see if we can get this thing fixed. Okay, and let's switch over to the capture card on the computer and we'll see if it detects. And it does look like it is detecting. Okay, I'm going to give it a wiggle test, see if anything happens when I wiggle the screen. Okay, so it does appear to flicker when I'm moving the HDMI cable, so that could be indication of a damaged port. However, it's not every time, so it's a little bit strange. Right, okay. So now for some reason it's just not happening, which is very weird indeed. So it could indeed be just a flickering display. However, the port is a little bit loose as well. Right, so I'll just connect up a controller. Let's see what kind of display we're getting on the computer. Okay, we're in 720p, so it's not picking up 1080. There we go, so there's the issue right there. So we're only picking up in 1440p, which it should be picking up in 4K. And that is not working at all. Okay, so that's going to need a retimer. Right, okay, so as soon as I flicked over to 4K we started getting issues with the display, so that's definitely going to be in need of a bit of TLC. So let's see what we can do with it, shall we? So I'll skip through the disassembly process, and when I've got the board out I'll resume the video. Right, okay, so here we are then with the board out of the chassis, and I'm just going to give the APU a bit of a clean because that's going to be cleaned before we put it back together anyway, so we may as well do that now, and then before we put it back together we can replace the thermal paste. And I'm not going to bother doing any kind of diagnosis on this because the only thing it could possibly be is going to be the HDMI retimer chip or the protection IC just here on the left hand side. Now if it's that IC then we can't change it because we can't buy them, and I don't have any donor boards to take one off and reball. But usually it's just the retimer which needs replacing, which is a fairly straightforward job to do for anyone with basic micro soldering skills. Okay, that will do for now. Let's go under the microscope and we'll have a look at this retimer, shall we? Right, okay, so looking under the microscope then, we've got the HDMI port just here. And then we've got, if we follow the line down, we've got the EMI filters. These EMI filters are passive EMI filters, so underneath these filters the trace is actually complete from one side to the other, so this wouldn't cause a flickering display, or not usually at least. But if we come along down at the bottom, we can see we've got the TDP158, which is the HDMI encoder IC. And this HDMI encoder IC is responsible for taking the HDMI and audio signals, or the display and audio signals, and basically retiming them or muxing them and sending them out to the HDMI port itself. I'm going to say, based on experience, 99% of the time it's going to be down to the retimer chip. So I'm going to get this replaced as a first instance. I'm not going to bother doing any more testing. I can clearly see that the HDMI port is good. I can clearly see that the solder on those are fine, and if I look inside the port as well, that looks absolutely fine, but I'll show you that under the scope as well. And as you can see from that port there, that does look absolutely fine, so I can't see any kind of loose pins or any damage to the port. So I'm going to say that most likely it's going to be the retimer chip, so I'm going to get that changed now. So here is the retimer chip. This is the U29. It's a TDP158. That's the HDMI retimer chip for the Xbox One X. The retimer chip for the Xbox One S is 75DP159, and they are completely different chips, so don't get those mixed up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the old chip off. I'll replace the solder that's underneath, and then I'll get a new chip installed. So I'm going to set my hot air to 480 degrees Celsius and 60% airflow. That should give me enough heat to transfer through to the board to get this chip removed. These boards are really thick boards. There's about 12 layers on these, and they take quite a lot of heat to get the chip removed, especially on the One X. And there's the old chip removed. So let's pop a bit of flux there, and we'll get the new solder on there. So I'm going to replace the solder with leaded solder, and that's going to be a lower melting temperature, and it's going to make it a lot safer and a lot easier for us to install a new chip. So I'll get that replaced with leaded solder just by mixing the old stuff, and that'll be absolutely fine. So my soldering iron, I use 450 degrees Celsius, and I use a TS100, so it's a fairly cheap soldering iron, especially considering the capabilities it's got. Okay, and I'm going to leave that blob of solder in the middle. Number one, so as we make sure we've got enough under there to transfer heat away from the chip. And number two, it's going to allow us to align the chip pretty much perfectly without even trying. Okay, so there's a brand new HDMI encoder IC there, or Retimer chip, redriver, whatever you would like to call it. It's known by different names, but it is the HDMI Retimer IC for the Xbox One X. So this is the TDP158, like I said, and the 75DP159 would probably display in this, but it just would not give you true 4K, and you might experience issues. So I'm going to knock my hot air down to 440, and I'm going to knock my airflow down to 40% to get this chip installed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some heat into the board before I attempt to install the chip. That way it prevents heat from hitting the chip as much and allows us to install it a little bit safer. So I'm going to wait for the middle pad to fully molten. Okay, so I'm just going to clear up that excess solder that's pushed out from under the chip. That's perfectly normal to get excess solder under the chip. So we just dab it with the soldering iron. That's going to pick up the solder off the pads. Okay, and you'll see that because those pads are perfectly aligned up with the chip, it makes it so much easier just to solder the actual pins themselves or the pads themselves. And now I'm going to go ahead and just resolder it and flow it into place properly. Press and hold. Perfect. And then we'll just clean up again. Okay, just time to clean up and then we'll inspect it, make sure it's soldered correctly, and then we can go ahead and get it tested. So I'm going to use 99.9% isopropyl alcohol, and I'm just going to scrub it using a toothbrush just to clean off any of the flux residue that's on the board, and then we're good to go. So I'm going to give it a really nice clean. And then I'm going to dry it off using a bit of warm air. Perfect. Okay, so let's inspect the chip on an angle, make sure it's soldered correctly. First of all, let's tilt it on an angle and make sure that pin number 1 is in the correct location. So let's just dry off the top of the chip. We do have a solder bridge there that I've just noticed. The chip is in the correct location though, according to the dot in the bottom corner. That chip's in the correct location, so I'll just touch up the 2 solder joints where we've got a bridge, and then I can inspect it. So I couldn't see that when I had the flux on the board, but that's fine. We can just touch up, and there we go. So let's pop it on an angle, and we'll zoom right the way in. And that looks perfect. Same for that side, that looks absolutely fine. And that side. And that side as well looks fine, so should be good to go there. Right, okay, so let's go ahead and just clean off the heatsink. Let's just get rid of the dust off there and also the old thermal paste as well, just so we can prep it to get new thermal paste on. So I'm just going to give it a brush down with a paintbrush, as I always do, and then I'll clean off the thermal paste. We never want to put these back together without replacing the thermal paste, even if it's only a few weeks old. Thermal paste isn't that expensive, and it saves them being returned for overheating issues under warranty, because it wouldn't have been overheating before, so it shouldn't be overheating when it goes back. Okay, and that's ready for some fresh thermal paste. So I'm going to use some MX4 and add the perfect amount. And let's pop on the heatsink. Right, okay. So I'm going to assemble this outside the case just for testing, but we should be good to go on this. So I'm going to get the hard drive, pop that in place. The reason I'm doing it outside the case is because if I sit there and screw everything back in and then it doesn't work, then we've got to unscrew everything again. So we might as well just test it as it is right outside the case, and that just saves us a little bit of time when we do have to do more work to it. Most of the time, what I've done to it right now is going to fix the issue, but I would much rather test it now before I put it back together, and then I can give it a good clean out and get it back to the customer. Okay, let's get the front panel, and I'm not going to bother with the Wi-Fi card or anything like that. I can do a full test later on before I take it back. I just want to know that it's working before I go any further. So let's pop in, let's get the original HDMI lead that we used, which is the one I'm using for my microscope. I do have an Elgato capture card, but that's playing up at the moment. I can't seem to get it to accept an input source from a PS4, so I'm kind of not using it right now. I'm just waiting on some parts to come for that. And That's a little bit strange, it's not turning on. That's very strange. Right. That's not normal at all. It should be turning on. I could have a bad retimer chip, but it is brand new. Right. Right, I'm going to try my own power supply. So this is a known good. Right, okay, so this could have a faulty power supply. So that's working with my power supply, but it's not working with the customers, and it was earlier. But nothing's happened to the power supply. And now it's working. What? Right, well that was a bit weird, unless there was just a problem with the cable itself, but it shouldn't be. Well, let's go to capture card, let's see if we get a display. And we do. Right, so I'm going to pop the fan on because we need that for keeping the console cool. And I don't notice any flickering anymore. So it should be fixed. So I'm going to check the display and just see what display we're in. So let's have a look what resolution we're in right now. So TV and display and 1440p. I'm not sure why it's not picking up 1080p, 4K, but that said, it is working in 1080 and 1440 where it wasn't before, so that should work. Ah, there we go. Okay, so it won't let me okay, so it's not picking up 4K, but that could just be the capture card. That's fine. It's picking up 1440p, so it should be okay on 4K. Right, so let's allow auto detect. No, I didn't want that. I wanted to go back. And now it might work. Perfect. Excellent. So we've now got 4K and it's not flickering at all. So that is absolutely perfect. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get this back together. I'm going to put it back in the case and I'm going to call this job done. So happy days. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is I'm just going to finish cleaning the fan and the chassis, things like that. And I'll get it all back together. And then I'll make sure that it's still going to turn on afterwards, because what happened with the power supply then was a little bit strange. It could have just been a bad connection on my end. I might need to change my power cable. I've had that one for quite a while now, and I do use it for every console, or every console that requires it, which is 90% of them. So what I'll do, I'll probably end up changing that cable at some point in the near future. Hopefully there's nothing wrong with the customer's power supply. Okay, that is pretty much that. So fingers crossed we are good to go now. So let's just plug her in and we'll give her another test, make sure it's all working, and should be good to go. And it turns on, so it must have just been an intermittent problem. We'll give it another test before I take it back. I've got another console of this customer to work on before I do that anyway. So I will give it another final test before I actually take it back to the customer, just to make sure it still turns on. Let's go capture card, and we should be picking up the display any moment now. There we go, perfect. Let's take a Xbox disc. In this case, we're going to be FIFA 17. And it already has a disc in, perfect. Saves me testing. So Forza Horizon 4 is in there. We're on to the dashboard. Let's pop Forza Horizon 4 back in there. Just make sure it loads up. There we go, perfect. Right, so I'm assuming Wi-Fi is going to work, but I'm going to check it anyway. So let's go to the settings. Let's go for network settings. Just make sure it picks up my Wi-Fi card, or my Wi-Fi router rather. I'm not going to connect because it will ask me to update. But yes, it is picking up the Wi-Fi, so that's absolutely fine. I don't really need to test and make sure it connects. If it picks it up, it's going to connect to it. So we're still in 4K. As you can see, it supports 4K on the capture card, which is perfect. So this is now displaying in 4K without flickering, which is absolutely beautiful considering it was flickering in 1440p before we changed the retimer. So just to summarise then, this console was sent in because it had a flickering display, and I'm just going to double check actually before I finish up. And yep, wiggle test absolutely fine. So I'm wiggling that right now and it's not doing anything. So the wiggle test is absolutely fine. So this console was sent in for a flickering display. The customer initially thought it was the HDMI port itself, but in actual fact it was the TDP158, which is the HDMI retimer OC for the Xbox One X. And sometimes when that goes bad, it can flicker on and off because it's either not receiving enough power or because something's shorting out to ground on a temporary basis or something like that. But nonetheless, by replacing the TDP158, we've managed to fix this console and get it to display properly in 4K without any issues. But that's going to be it for this video. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down in the comment section down below. If you want to see more repair videos where I try and fix mainly consoles, but sometimes other things too, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications so that you're notified every time I upload. I do now have channel members, so from just £1.99 a month you can support the channel and get early access to all of the content that I publish on the channel. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, see you later. Bye for now.